Early in the day, another Orioles pitching injury with Zach Eflin hitting the IL certainly had me down. But then I watched Dean Kremer pitch well, the offense light it up, and the O's win it in New York and felt just a little bit better. I'll recap that W plus discuss what the O's will do with Eflin out coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Wednesday, August 21st, 2024, and welcome back in to the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb. And coming up on today's episode, we are going to recap the Orioles' 9-5 victory over the New York Mets on Tuesday night. Get you the 5 things you need to know from that one, including more revenge from James McCann, a big start from Dean Kremer, and maybe a move in the positive direction for Craig Kimbrel. Then we'll talk about the big Orioles news from the day. Another starting pitcher is heading to the IL as Zach Eflin is onto the injured list with some shoulder inflammation. We'll talk about what the severity is, how long he could be out, and what the O's will do without a guy who, since the trade deadline, has been by far, well, maybe not by far, but at least in that number one spot as their best starting pitcher. But that's all coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast, which is brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnMLB and use code all lowercase LockedOnMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. So we start today with an Orioles victory. Final score from Citi Field in New York is the Orioles 9 and the New York Mets 5, as the O's have now split the first 2 games of this series. Got a day game here on Wednesday to decide the winner of the 3-game set. But the Orioles get to 74 and 53 on the season with the win. And as I am recording right now, it is a 3-3 game in the top of the 10th in Yankee Stadium between the Guardians and the Yankees. Cleveland's got a couple in scoring position with 1 out. So hopefully they can get this win in 10 innings. If they do, the Orioles will jump back into first place in the AL East. But I'm going to get you the 5 things you need to know from this Orioles win over the Mets. And the first thing you need to know is James McCann absolutely loves facing his old team. Of course, if you don't remember, James McCann was a New York Met after a couple of really good years with the White Sox. He became a free agent, signed a pretty big 4-year free agent deal to be the Mets starting catcher. But in 2020 and 2021, in 21 and 22, wasn't very good. And then before the 2023 season, the Mets basically salary dumped McCann to the Orioles. They traded into Baltimore for like a essentially nothing teenage prospect and paid off most of the remainder of the salary on McCann's 2-year deal just to get rid of him. And Mets fans, had basically booed him out of town by the end of that 2022 season. We're not very happy with one James McCann. And then McCann came to the O's, and he's not like he's been the most productive player, but he's a backup catcher, one of the best catchers in the league, and Adley Rutschman. And I think he's filled his role incredibly well in his 2 years in Baltimore. But what has been maybe the best thing to watch is what he's done when he's gotten a chance to face these Mets. Last year, the Mets came to Camden Yards. The Orioles swept them in a 3-game series. McCann got the start in 2 of those 3 games and went 4 for 6 with 2 doubles, a walk, and 5 RBIs. It was by far his best weekend of last season. But Tuesday was another special moment. His first return to Citi Field. McCann did not play in game 1 of the series on Monday, so he got a chance to kind of take on the Mets, take on these fans that he hadn't seen since he was traded. And what does he do? Well, he comes through with a nice little sac fly in the second inning to put the Orioles up 3-0. And then the big swing, a 2-run homer in the 4th off of Jose Quintana, 107 off the bat, 408 feet for his first home run since June 25th, almost 2 months since he went yard. And of course, he saved it for those Mets fans. That had to be an awesome moment for McCann. Second thing you need to know from the win, well, it was a good night overall, I would say, for the Orioles offense, putting up 9 runs on 11 hits while drawing 4 walks in this game. Fairly complete performance for these O's. You had big nights from multiple guys. You look up and down the lineup, you had 3 different 2-hit games. You had 7 or 9 starters get at least 1 hit in this one. I mean, you had Austin Slater getting the leadoff spot against a lefty again. He goes 2 for 3. He's now 8 for 20 with the Orioles. That's a 400 average with 3 walks as well. And then he comes out of the game when the Mets go to the righty relievers and Cedric Mullins comes in. And what does Mullins do? Well, he goes 2 for 2 with a couple of singles and a run scored off the bench. So that was fantastic to see for the O's. Anthony Santander got it going, took a hanging curveball into left field for a 2-run shot in the first, his 37th home run of the year. And Colton Cowser was halfway to the cycle. He had a review-aided triple in the second inning. He had himself a double in the game as well. Cowser coming through with a couple of hard-hit balls and coming against a lefty was really nice to see for Colton Cowser. Just a really good, complete performance by this Orioles offense. Third thing you need to know from this one, well, Dean Kremer was very good again for the Orioles. It's kind of been a roller coaster last couple of months for Kramer, and he's had some starts in July and August where the line didn't look very good, but his defense was kind of letting him down at times. But his last 2 starts, the line has looked good. This is now back-to-back starts for Dean Kremer of 6 innings and just 1 run. He goes 6 innings, the 1 run on 2 hits on Tuesday night, 7 strikeouts to 3 walks on exactly 100 pitches. The Mets had just 3 hard hit balls against Dean Kremer over 6 innings in this game. Super, super impressive by the Orioles right-hander, who had a really even pitch mix in this game. I mean, he threw all 5 of his pitches, but it was 25 four-seamers, 23 sinkers, 21 cutters, 21 splitters, and then 10 curveballs. And as the game went on, he had better and better command of all of those pitches. And what was interesting to see, he had at least 2 called strikes with each of his 5 pitches, which meant at times during that game, he felt comfortable throwing all 5 over the plate for a called strike. And there's not a lot of pitchers who can do that on a consistent basis. And then the strikeout pitch, the pitch that was really nasty, was once again that new splitter for Dean Kremer. Now, he threw that pitch 21 times. He got 5 whiffs on 10 swings against it. He struck out Francisco Lindor twice with that splitter, which was really, really impressive to watch from Kramer. And it just looked great. And on a day when Zach Eflin, who's been their best starter the past 3 weeks, goes on the injured list, how huge is it for Kramer to go out there and give you basically what Eflin's been giving you? 6 innings of 1-run ball. Fantastic there from Dean. Now, the fourth thing you need to know from this Orioles win over the Mets is that the bullpen usage in this game showed us a lot about how Brandon Hyde currently feels about his bullpen. Kramer leaves the game, Orioles leading 7-1 heading into the bottom of the 7th inning, and you're feeling like, okay, the O's have some struggling relievers. They are up 7-1, and you're certainly trying to hold this lead against at least a solid Mets offense that you're facing. You don't want to be, too crazy and just let anybody out there, but you feel like, okay, 6-run lead, late innings, maybe this is a chance for a Craig Kimbrel or a Gregory Soto to come in with a large lead, but still protecting a lead and try and get their seasons, or at least their stints here in August, back on track. And that is not what Brandon Hyde chose to do. And honestly, you can't really blame him, because even with a 6-run lead, with as poorly as Soto and Kimbrel have pitched in any sort of leverage situations over the last few weeks, are you really trusting those guys in those spots? Instead, he goes to Cionel Perez, who did get a 1-2-3 7th with a couple of strikeouts. So that was good to see. Okay, you get it to the 8th, you're still up 7-1. And then he goes to Birch Smith, who hasn't been perfect, but has kind of found himself in somewhat of a high leverage righty role. And it's Smith in the 8th with a 6-run lead, because again, Hyde just doesn't trust these other guys. And Perez and Birch Smith were both rested enough to pitch in this game. It's not like, he super pushed either of them to do anything crazy to pitch here. Like at a normal time, they might have pitched in this one anyway, but you'd like to rest him a little more when you're winning 7-1. But that's just not the spot that the Orioles are in with this bullpen. And then unfortunately, Perez was good, but Smith helped make it interesting. And yeah, there was a 1-out error by Gunnar Henderson, which should have made it easily a runner on second with 2 down, and Gunnar booted the ball. But if you're Smith, you can't let that just pile onto you. And unfortunately, it did. He gives up an RBI double and then a 3-run homer to JD Martinez. And all of a sudden, it's a 7-5 game, and there's still only 1 out in the 8th. And then Brandon Hyde has got to think, what do I got to do here? And you're looking down at the bullpen, and your best reliever left is Yennier Cano, and he's pitched 4 times in the last 6 days, and yet it forced the Orioles to go to Cano. And you're kind of at the point where the O's are backed into a corner right now. The bullpen, I would say right now, and you could make some arguments, there's been some other times, but I don't think you can make a strong argument that, yeah, this is the worst spot the Orioles bullpen has been in 2024, is where they sit right now. But the fifth and final thing you need to know from the Orioles 9-5 win over the Mets on Tuesday night is that they did finish out the win. And I got to say, the Mets defense did help the Orioles bullpen be able to finish that thing out, because Yennier Cano came in 5th game in 7 days and his velocity was down. Now, he did a great job of getting a ground out and a strikeout to retire the final 2 batters of the 8th, keep it a 7-5 game, didn't even let the tying run get to the plate. But you could tell, like, he was laboring, and you really did not want to have to use him in the 9th inning as well. It could have gone poorly. And the Mets defense, on a little flare by Gunnar Henderson to left field with 1st and 2nd and 1 out, just go watch the play. Like, I'm not even going to explain it. The amount of throwing errors the Mets made on that play, basically, it should have been a play where the ball was caught and no runs scored. Instead, the Orioles scored 2 runs on that play and took a 9-5 lead. And although they didn't extend the lead, it was huge to get it to 9-5, because then Craig Kimbrel starts warming up in the bullpen and you're like, all right, Cano can sit. Maybe this is a big enough lead for Kimbrel to hold. This could be great. Well, then it's 9-5, bottom 9, and Kimbrel doesn't come into the game. Cano goes back out there. But after the 9th inning played out, you kind of realized, I kind of love what Brandon Hyde did there in the 9th inning. He allowed Cano to face Francisco Alvarez, who is a good hitter, of course, had the walk-off homer for the win on Monday. And Cano got Alvarez to ground out, and then he put Kimbrel in the game. So he had Kimbrel avoid maybe the best hitter he could have faced if he got cleanly through the 9th inning, and just said, hey, this is your chance back in the 9th to hold a lead, but we're going to make it as easy as possible for you. There's going to be nobody on base. There's already 1 out, so you only got to get 2. You only have to face 8 and 9 in the order, and we've got a 4-run lead. And Kimbrel responded. He threw strikes. 5 out of 7 pitches were strikes. His velocity still wasn't amazing, but his location was so much better. And what did he do? He got a fly out and a strikeout. Nobody reached base, and the Orioles won the game. And I'm not saying an outing of retiring 2 batters is going to turn this thing around for Craig Kimbrel, because we know how rough it has looked over the past month or so. But this is probably the most positive sign we've seen in a while from Kimbrel, because although it's not a safe situation, this is still a bit of leverage. You're holding a 4-run lead in the 9th inning. If you implode, like Kimbrel could have imploded and made that thing interesting, and he did not. And I'm not saying that if the O's are up by 1 today in the 9th inning that they're going to go back to Craig Kimbrel. But this is a nice positive step forward for him. Daniel Allentuck had a good article in the Baltimore Banner this week about how, hey, the O's are not going to give up on Craig Kimbrel. They're still going to try to help him find it. And I think a good step forward. Shout out to the Mets defense for giving the O's the chance to do that. And they do hold on to secure the win. But that was the good news for the Orioles on Tuesday. The bad news came before the game. You thought there can't be any more starting pitchers that can go on the injured list. Well, unfortunately, there can be. And Zach Eflin, who's been amazing for the O's since the trade deadline, is now on the IL as well. Coming up next, I'll break down his injury, what the timeline can be, and what the O's are going to do in the meantime without maybe their best starter at the moment. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. So with all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. So the Orioles get the big win over the Mets on Tuesday. Still awaiting, as I record here, the result of Guardians and Yankees. They are into the top of the 11th inning in a 3-3 game. Somehow neither team scored in the 10th. Guardians had second and third, no outs for Steven Kwan, who struck out. He never does that. Then they loaded the bases with one out. And of course, Josh Naylor grounds into a double play. And then the Yankees had Soto Judge due up in the bottom of the 11th with a runner on second. You're thinking, this game is over, except Emmanuel Clase is super nasty and has thrown 2 scoreless innings in this game. And now they're on to the 11th. We'll see how either team can screw it up. Hopefully, the Guardians can pull it out and put the O's back into first place. But the O's, listen, they're going to need all the help they can get from the teams playing the Yankees down the stretch because it's injury after injury right now for the Orioles. And they got a pretty big one, the news that came down on Tuesday. Zach Eflin has been placed on the 15-day injured list with right shoulder inflammation. Brandon Hyde telling the media before Tuesday's game that Eflin felt a little extra soreness after his last start when he again pitched incredibly well. Then he threw his bullpen midweek and the shoulder still wasn't feeling great and just didn't feel like he could make his scheduled start on Wednesday. Hyde said they want to be safe, give him a little rest, and so they put him on the 15-day injury list. Now, the good news is the way Hyde was talking about it on Tuesday definitely made it sound like the Orioles are not super concerned. It kind of sounded like when Grayson Rodriguez went on the IL in the middle of the season with that shoulder soreness, the Orioles were just like, look, he didn't bounce back like he wanted to. We're going to give him a little rest. He came back, and I know Grayson is now on the IL, but with a very separate injury. In that stint after he came back, he seemed to be fine. As soon as he returned from the IL, the O's just thought he's a little off. He needs a little bit of a break. And hopefully that's the case for Zach Eflin. He would be eligible to return. I believe it will be around September 4th, it looks like. And Brandon Hyde did say, like, hey, we're hoping that it will be the minimum 15-day IL stint, and if not, only a little bit more. So maybe, second week of September, you can hope that Eflin gets back and you can still get 3 or 4 starts out of him to finish out the regular season. That would be nice. But even if you are just maybe missing 3 Zach Eflin starts, that is a huge loss for this Orioles team because he's been incredible. I mean, he has been full stop, I think, the best addition any team made at the trade deadline. He's got the best stats by far of any starting pitcher who was acquired at the deadline. 4 starts, 25 and a third innings, a 2.13 ERA with 25 strikeouts to 2 walks in his first 4 starts as an Oriole after the deadline. Eflin's been amazing. And he is, the O's have won all 4 of his starts as well, which is huge in this division race. Even if it's just 3 starts, he is going to be sorely missed. Now, if this is a long-term thing and Eflin has to, miss a larger chunk of time, anything close to missing the season, like that could be something close to a detrimental blow. On the flip side, if him and Grayson Rodriguez both come back at some point in September and they're healthy, I'm still feeling good about the playoff rotation of Burns, Rodriguez, Eflin with, a guy like Albert Suarez, and even the way Dean Kremer is pitched sitting right behind them as well. But you just kind of look at what's going on with this Orioles rotation. They now have a full, legitimate major league rotation on the injured list. This is the Orioles IL starting rotation right now. Kyle Bradish, Grayson Rodriguez, Zach Eflin, John Means, Tyler Wells. That's a pretty good major league rotation if that's your 5. That there was a chance, now it never happened. There was a chance that maybe could have been the Orioles 5 at some point this year. Now it was never the case, but I'd feel okay sending that 5-man rotation out there. That's what the Orioles have on the injured list. They had honestly amazing injury luck the last couple of years. It has come back to bite them this season. The injury bug has hit them hard. Now, Cade Povich was recalled to take Zach Eflin's roster and rotation spot. And listen, if he can continue what he did Saturday, best start of his career against Boston over the weekend, they're still going to miss Eflin, but at the very least, the O's will still be in a solid spot if Povich can pitch like that. Now, that's a lot to ask of the rookie who doesn't have a lot of major league time, but hopefully he can build off of that one. So your current rotation is Corbin Burns, Albert Suarez, Dean Kremer, Trevor Rogers, and Cade Povich. That IL rotation is feeling a whole lot better than the Orioles' real rotation, but that is where they are at right now. Now, you look at this, and yeah, it stinks that Eflin is out. Yeah, he's been a huge part of this team. And yeah, if he's out for a while, again, this could be a gigantic detriment to the Orioles. But on the flip side of it, it's like, even if he does miss a little bit of time, look at the other teams in Major League Baseball. Everybody's injured. No team by FanGraphs is projected to win more than 95 games this season. This would be the first time since 2014 that there wasn't at least one team in Major League Baseball that won 100 games. Like, it's just a lot of teams clumped up around that 90 win range right now. And maybe that helps the current state of the Orioles because they're among all these other teams that have all these injuries. It's just going to be about who can get hot in October. And if Eflin can be good then, and Grayson can be good then, and Westberg and Coulomb and Jacob Webb can be good to come back then, maybe the O's can be that team that gets hot, even with all the injuries that they have sustained. This one certainly hurts. It hurts a lot. I've loved what I've seen from Zach Eflin. He's been incredible. It is going to be tough not getting to watch him pitch every 5 days, but the O's have been next man up all season. And hopefully, again, it's a quick injury for Eflin. It's just those 15 days or so, like Hyde was talking about, and he'll be back quickly to rejoin this rotation and hopefully is pitching as well as he was before going on the IL. But with Eflin out, he was scheduled to start the day game today here on Wednesday in New York. The question is, who starts this game for the Orioles? And there are a couple of interesting options. It's not super straightforward. I'll talk about that and the other roster move that the Orioles made Tuesday coming up after the break. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by Prize Picks. For me, the most fun and exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. How do you play it? Well, all you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. You can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. NFL season is coming up. You just make your selections in 60 seconds and you're done, more or less on passing yards, rushing yards, receiving yards, tackles, whatever it may be. You just say, hey, you know what? I'm thinking more or I'm thinking less on that player, and you can win some money. So download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. That's code LOCKEDONMLB on Prize Picks for a deposit match up to $100. At Prize Picks, run your game. So as the Orioles unfortunately had to place Zach Eflin on the injured list on Tuesday, that means they are looking for a starting pitcher for today's day game in New York on Wednesday. And it's not as straightforward, even though they brought up Cade Povich, to just put him in that spot, because unfortunately, Povich is the best option to replace Eflin overall in the rotation, but he doesn't quite line up to pitch on Wednesday because Povich started Saturday night in Baltimore and then was optioned back down after the game. It was a spot start. Brandon Hyde said, look, we just want to get everybody else an extra day of rest. And Povich was pitching well in AAA, so they gave him a chance and he pitched really well. But the plan was always to send him back down. But when you pitch that well and you have an injury where you're going to be the first guy to come back up, unfortunately, because he pitched Saturday, the off days in there are then Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday is that fourth off day. So you can't start on Wednesday. So Povich is out. He'll either start Thursday or more likely probably Friday for the Orioles against the Houston Astros. So on Wednesday, your next option you would look at would be Corbin Burnes. Now, Burnes was slated to start Thursday because the Orioles had pushed everybody back a day. But in theory, because Burnes, despite the big struggles, first time he'd ever allowed 8 earned runs in a game over 4 pretty rough innings against the Red Sox on Friday night, but he did pitch Friday, so off days, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, means he is on regular rest to start on Wednesday. But Brandon Hyde did say before the game, or at least kind of alluded to, maybe not Corbin Burnes being an option for the Orioles. Just felt like, and you'd have to think because of that, we'll say rough start. It was pretty bad, rough start. Maybe you do want to give him that extra day of rest. So you're going through all that, and then you're basically you're looking at AAA. Are you going to go with a bullpen game, which Brandon Hyde said was possible, or are you going to go to AAA? I mean, Justin Armbruster scheduled to start in AAA Wednesday. He's had struggles this year, probably not him. Tucker Davidson scheduled to start Thursday. He's been okay, but he has an 8.5 ERA in August. Maybe not him. Bruce Zimmerman could have been scratched. He started Tuesday in Norfolk, but the Orioles decided against it, so he made his regular start in AAA. Chase McDermott is on the Norfolk IL with a shoulder issue, so he's not your guy. Brandon Young is shooting up prospect lists, and I wouldn't be surprised if we saw Brandon Young at some point this year, 3.56 ERA and 86 innings, but he started on Sunday for Norfolk, so obviously he would not be on regular rest to be available. So basically, you were kind of looking at Cole Irvin, who, remember, when the Orioles DFA'd him, cleared waivers and stayed in the organization in AAA, or a bullpen game. And I'm sure the Orioles were considering that bullpen game, But when you look at what has happened to their bullpen and specifically the extra relievers they had to use to win that game Tuesday, they were left with one choice. And as I am recording right now, Brandon Hyde has announced that Cole Irvin will be called up to start Wednesday's game. Now, we know it was good for a while and then pretty bad for a while before the Orioles moved into the bullpen and then eventually DFA'd him. He's made 2 appearances down in AAA Norfolk since he went back there. 2 starts, 5 2/3 innings. He's allowed 3 earned runs, 6 2/3 innings, 3 earned runs, 5 hits, 5 Ks, 6 walks and a hit batter. Not great, but he has been working on stuff. So some of those stats you're not going to take fully at face value because, again, he's kind of trying, not using his best pitch mix to get guys out, more using mixes to see, okay, how can I turn this thing around and get myself back to the big leagues? Well, he's going back to the big leagues mostly out of necessity, with the Orioles needing a starter for Wednesday. They will have to make a roster move. That will be the other thing that will be really intriguing here, because the O's did make another move on Tuesday. Keegan Aiken, congratulations to him, is headed to the paternity list. So the Orioles recalled Dylan Tate, who's been pitching really well lately, out of the Norfolk bullpen. 5 2/3 scoreless, 8 Ks, 3 walks in the month of August out of the Tide's pen. So that's been really nice to see for Tate, who's been down, I think, for well over a month at this point since the Orioles added Birch Smith. So that's been good to see for Tate. Now, Tate would be the easiest guy to just option right back to AAA because he just got here. But Tate is one of your fresher arms out of the bullpen. So if you're going with Cole Irvin, you're going to want your freshest arms out of the bullpen. The O's bullpen isn't super fresh. Maybe you do want Tate here, but that doesn't leave a lot of options to send other guys down. My guess would be Tate goes down, Irvin comes up. They'd have to make a 40-man move as well to get Irvin back on there, but there's a couple of names they could look at. But yeah, it's not an ideal scenario for the Orioles. Zach Eflin going on the IL certainly is not anything close to an ideal scenario, especially the way that he has been pitching. But listen, you know what? You got to do what you got to do. And sometimes what you got to do is call Cole Irvin up. And hopefully he's been, he hasn't pitched much since he went down. Like, he hasn't thrown in a AAA game since August 14th. This will be a week of rest. So clearly, they've had him working on stuff in bullpens and trying to get back to what he was. I mean, he had that 5 or 6, 7 start stretch early in the season where he was just dominant and had those 3 straight scoreless starts. He was great for the O's. And that was this season in the major. So it is still in there for Cole Irvin. He's not going to get a long leash. I mean, more than likely, he's going to start this game Wednesday. And because Povich is up here to be in the rotation, Irvin will get sent right back down after Wednesday's game. And probably Aiken will return from the paternity list to then take his roster spot and move back into the bullpen. So Irvin doesn't have a huge chance to regain a rotation spot right now. But if he comes up and pitches well enough, he's at least an option for the O's for the remainder of the season. And they'd love to find a way to win this game and win this series here on Wednesday. They're going to need some help from the offense. Hopefully another big day with 9 runs would be nice. But either way, Irvin's here. We'll see what he's changed. We'll see if he can turn things back around against this Mets lineup on Wednesday. But that'll do it for today's episode. Of course, I will be back tomorrow to recap the final game between the Orioles and the Mets, the little rubber match here, a day game, a 1:10 start for the O's and the Mets. As I mentioned, it will be Cole Irvin going for the Orioles, kind of making this spot start with Eflin on the IL. And it will be, once again, another lefty for the New York Mets. You think, wow, they can't have any more of lefties, can they? Oh, yes, they can. It'll be Sean Manaea, the veteran lefty who's had an up and down season with the Mets. He will take the bump for New York. I'll be back tomorrow to recap Game 3 and then talk a little bit more maybe about Craig Kimbrel. This was a nice positive for him on Tuesday night, but what do the Orioles need to do? What should they do with Kimbrel moving forward this season? That is coming up on tomorrow's episode. But until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.